So this is going to be my first video in hopefully a series of dirty tricks and hacks. I've really wanted to do this for a while. And what I'm talking about is basically sort of little, Duncan Lamont wrote a great book called Street Fighter's Guide to Improvisation, and it was full of like little suggestions of things you could do when you put on the spot on a gig, something difficult comes up. And he used the excellent term by fair means or foul. So fair means is a lot of what we might cover is adequate preparation of a tune. Excuse me. You get a chance to practice it, get a chance to work through it, you get a chance to properly map it, properly learn it, and then you go out and perform it. However, situations in real world music aren't always like that. Sometimes you get put on the spot. I mean, there's famous stories about that. For instance, Moment's Notice is called Moment's Notice because I think it was Curtis Fuller said on receiving the chart from John Coltrane, it says, "Surely you don't expect us to play that on a moment's notice." And the rest is, as they say, legend. He pulled a similar trick, of course, on Tommy Flanagan on Giant Steps, which is unfortunately something Tommy was never able to live down as one of the foremost jazz pianists of his generation. That's rather sad. John Coltrane, what a dick, eh? I don't really mean that, but... yeah, I mean, I think in those situations, Coltrane was probably trying to dig something out of his musicians, something different. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So, dirty tricks are things that get you through those kind of on-the-spot situations where you're kind of like, for instance, one time I played with Duncan Lamont, he pulled out a Kenny Wheeler chart on me. That's called being, really fast Kenny Wheeler chart. That's called being put on the spot. Duncan died recently, sadly, which is probably why he's on my mind today. But somewhat in his spirit, I'd like to suggest this really very simple strategy, which certainly got me through the Kenny Wheeler, which is simply that we learn to miss out chords that are annoying or difficult. And this might seem like really at once kind of basic, and on the other hand, kind of a bit, dodgy, for want of a better word. But it is, I think, a good thing to do. And I'm going to start with Giant Steps in honour of Tommy Flanagan. Here it is, slightly less of a lick than Coltrane played it. So, it's not impossible to play at this tempo. It's if you can't play at this tempo, you should probably practice it so you can play everything at this tempo. It's good exercise. So I'm just going to play over every single chord and hear what that sounds like. Okay, so the problem with that is that there's a lot of eighth notes. Now, it sounds alright for a chorus or two, but after a while it starts to, get a little bit too much, which is often the way with Giant Steps. People say the real challenge with Giant Steps is not to play Giant Steps, but to play Giant Steps musically. So, this is where my leaving chords out thing kicks in, because it can just lead to more natural phrasing. So there's two sides to this. Obviously, you've got to leave the chords out when you're playing. But the other thing is that you've got to be able to identify which chords are the most important ones. And in Giant Steps, it's actually quite straightforward because you have B major, that's important, that's the very first chord. And then you have some gubbins, and then you have E flat major in bar 3 on beat 1, and it lasts for a whole bar. That seems to be more important than the other chords, actually. Then it goes G major, and you've got B major in a similar position, just in... So it's bar 3 for E flat major and it's bar 7 for B major, right? So those are going to be our main waypoints. And after that, it gets a bit easier, okay? Again, as is common with the Barry Harris approach, I tend to just see 2/5s as an entity. I think most experienced jazz musicians see 2/5s as being a kind of gubbins thing together. Regardless of what kind of, how they learnt or who they studied with. I think that's just a very general skill in learning how to interpret charts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the B, I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap, and then I'm going to basically use one of my forward motion things, I'm going to basically go into E flat. So essentially, if you like to look at it that way, what I'm looking at is the whole 2 bars as an invisible pathway from B major to E flat major, right? In practice, I'm just going to leave a little bit of a gap out after the B major and then the G major, okay, and then I'm going to play into the E flat and the B respectively. And this will create just a little bit of a gap. It'll be quite natural. You'll hear it. Okay, so that's how that works. Now you might notice, if you've watched Christian Van Hemmert's channel, that this is quite similar to a suggestion he makes, which is a commonly known hack for giant steps, which is where you play the first 3 bars as a minor 2-5-1 going into E flat major, and the B major relates to F half diminished, and then we've got the B flat 7 going into E flat major. And this is a very similar thing. It's I suppose what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you a larger logic, if that makes any sense, of how these things can be applied. Now you'll notice that hopefully that my playing was actually a bit more relaxed and a bit more musical in the second example, and I was able to phrase a bit more. Perhaps if I speed it up a little bit, it might actually work even better. Okay, so nobody's saying don't, play every chord in giant steps. I mean, I actually filled it in a little bit. You might have heard me play a little bit more. I think on the second chorus, I played the G, B flat, E flat, F sharp, B. So there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just nice to know that you can back away a bit and kind of give it a bit more space. So I'd like to see how I can apply this, or show how I can apply this logic to a few other tunes. Here's a fun one. I'm going to choose this one because this is something that Rick Beato covered a while back. But he makes some very good points. I'll connect to it. It's very interesting what he talks about. So the problem with Song for Bilbao is it's got this little section here, which is all triads, all major triads. So there's a lot of chords there, and they don't really belong to the same key. So again, my suggestion would be, chop out the first F, play as much of that section as you fancy, and then do a big G to C7 sus at the end, okay? I'll demonstrate in a second. So in terms of playing over the other changes, I tend to favour playing the C dominant language that I would normally play on a 2-5 on the C7 sus. That seems to work very well. Are there, some kind of Lydian thing, obviously, on G flat major? I mean, you could even play on the A flat 7. So anyway, that's not really so important. It's relatively easy, that bit. so on. So hopefully you can hear how that works, and I think it works pretty well. Okay, I'm going to move on. Stable mates is one I covered a couple of videos back, and I just wanted to sort of remind everybody of what I'd done there. So this is inspired by Lee Morgan's solo. What Lee Morgan does is simply just ignores the C7 sharp 5 chord. So essentially it becomes like a A7, A flat 7, D flat major, a little bit of a gap, and then he plays D flat 7 into G flat major, and then it goes around the houses back into 1 again. G, half diminished, C7, F minor, B flat 7, A flat minor, A flat 7, D flat major, kind of like Green Dolphin Street transposed to the key of C. So essentially what he does is he ignores the irritating chord. Okay, like that, right? And then of course you've got this bit later on that's a bit annoying, but there's only 1/4 bar for this. Again. Yeah, so it's actually pretty easy. Let's do it a little faster. 1.5. It's still a little slow, isn't it? People play at all kinds of speeds. Notice I didn't play the B7 there, for instance, you know. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room. Here's another very hard tune. I'm going to choose Conception by George Shearing. Very difficult. Extremely difficult. Okay. This tune is basically, I think, one of the hardest bop tunes. Oops, sorry. That's actual Conception explained. This is what I want. So this is, you know, if I flash the chart up, you'll see that it's an absolute nightmare. It's just 8 million chords. What I tend to do is I tend to view the first bit as a 2-5-1 going into D flat major, so that's what it is, and then it goes into A major, so it kind of goes to the minor key subdominant, and then it goes to into G flat 7. Then we get, you know, that kind of move down. You can almost ignore that, the move down from B flat 7 to G7. That almost doesn't matter. And then we get 2-5-1 into E major, A major. So I kind of feel like I've got to nail the B flat 7 in bar 7. Let's try this. Stayed a bit long on the E flat there. Let's try that again. That was working quite effectively, I think. So. go. So that's how you do that. So it's still quite hard, but I'm just ignoring the bits that are a pain in the bum to solo over. So there's this sort of, this kind of thing. You always end up doing like repeating patterns for that. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you do a repeating pattern, even if it's, something less kind of obvious, like, even that is kind of just so textbook, isn't it? It's like, it's good to, not have to do that every single chorus, because people get bored of it very quickly. The other thing is like, you can just play the blues over that bit. You'll notice if you listen to the Kurt Rosenwinkel solo on this tune, you'll notice he simplifies down the changes a bit in his line. He doesn't try to play every single chord change, so if he doesn't, then should you? And Kurt's pretty good at playing chord changes, I might add. There's lots and lots of difficult tunes out there in the sort of repertoire. I hope by just choosing those 4, I've kind of demonstrated what I'm talking about. If anybody can think of any other suggestions of tunes that they find particularly difficult and want to know how they can bluff their way through it using extreme naughtiness, do post below and I'll try and do a short video of them at some point. But let me know what you think. I hope you found that useful. Sometimes it's good just to cheat a bit. Thanks for watching.